Welcome to the TLI workshop on the magic of the mindset. Before I introduce today's presenter, let me acknowledge the contribution of Maithili Prabhu, the event manager, Ines Benshek, the PR manager, the tech guru, Ashish Kuttaguru. Our presenter today is a product designer, speaker, and a coach. Emails started his career. He moved 5,000 miles away from lush green England to Bay Area. He's an active member of 2 clubs and served as an area and division director. He competes in contests very regularly. He won the 2017 District 4 evaluation contest. He placed second in this year's evaluation as well as international speech contest. He was recognized as the 2017 Toastmaster of the Year. Please help me welcome distinguished Toastmaster, Stewart Murrie.
Well, thank you very much, Abby. Yes, indeed, 5,000 miles. It sounds an awful lot when you say it like that. Those lush green rolling hills that I call home. Well, welcome everybody. Let me share my screen and we can get underway. Hopefully you can all see this now. Can you see the screen with the magic of mindset?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you again so much for the very warm welcome. And it's wonderful to be with you today for this workshop on mindset. This was originally going to be a workshop at the District 101 conference back in May, but things got a little bit complicated with a certain virus, which we won't talk about anymore today. But my workshops have always been as interactive as they can be, and I want to try to do that today as well, even though we're not in the same room. We have a virtual room that we can play with. So I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things, if you would. Firstly, open up the chat window, and at any point, if you have questions throughout the session, please do type your questions in there. There'll be a couple of opportunities during the presentation itself to answer some questions, and there'll be a bunch of time at the end as well to dig into those questions. So please type them into chat if you have them, and Ashish will be keeping tabs on those, and he'll be letting me know what those questions are. The second thing I'm going to ask you to do is throughout the session, I'll be asking, in fact, you some questions. And if you'd like to respond in the chat, that would be great. There'll certainly be exercises for you to do and things for you to think about as we go on throughout. And the last thing Abby would like me to ask you to do is if you would use the side-by-side mode so that you can see both me and the presentation. Up near the green bar at the top of your Zoom window, there's a little drop-down that says View Options. If you click on that, I think the last option on the list is side-by-side mode. And that way, if you need to see more details of the presentation, you can make that bigger. Or if you want to look at the fun things in my background, you can make my camera bigger, but you probably shouldn't do that. All right. So let's see. I'd like to start actually with a story. And this is a story about a man named Ernest Jones from my home country of 5,000 miles away of the United Kingdom. And he was a golfer. He was a very successful British golfer in the early 20th century. He, at the age of 25, in around 1913, was made the head professional golfer at his local golf club in Manchester. And 10 years later, he was made the head golf professional at the Women's National Tennis and Golf Club in New York City. And that's a position he held for over 35 years. And many of the students that he coached there went on to become champions themselves. He had won several club championships, and many of his students did as well. He was a very respected teacher and all around a pretty amazing golfer back in his day. But there's something that you should know about Ernest Jones, and that is that he only had one leg. He lost his other leg fighting as a soldier in the First World War. And most of his success came after he lost his leg. Now, I play a little bit of golf, and I have two working legs that, as far as I can tell, are perfectly normal and function very well. And I am terrible at golf. I can't imagine what it must be like to have to relearn your entire game, rebuild your entire career after such a traumatic event. But he did it. In fact, he was more successful afterwards than he was before. So let me ask you a question. What sort of words would you use to describe Ernest Jones? What sort of phrases or adjectives come to mind? Why don't you type them into the chat now? What sort of things do you think about? Tenacious, I like that. Resilient, yeah, that's really good. Determined, very much so. Unbelievable, yeah, it is kind of unbelievable, isn't it? Driven, focused, brave, he's a fighter. Yeah, I think all those are great suggestions. Earnest, I mean, it's right there in his name. Maybe that's all you need. It's a good name to begin with. Determined, resolute, accomplished, gifted, brave, all very good adjectives, certainly very fitting of Ernest Jones. Now let's talk about a different young man. This particular young man was pretty smart. He did okay in school, but the sorts of comments he got from his teachers were things like, he has ability, but he really needs to work harder. He really needs to try harder. He did pretty well in some subjects like music and science, and really badly in other subjects like art and history. And whenever he got a good grade, he would pat himself on the back and say to himself, wow, I'm really good at this. But whenever he got a bad grade, he would say things like, oh, it's not my fault. The teacher's terrible. Throughout his childhood, he had all kinds of hobbies, but he really never stuck with any of them for very long. As soon as things got difficult, he would give up on it and say, well, this is boring. It's too much work. I want to do something fun. He really loved playing soccer. And when he made it onto the school team, he quit after just one season because he didn't feel like the coach was giving him enough playing time. The stupid coach doesn't see how good he am, he said. Whenever his friends did something good, the boy would feel a little bit jealous. He'd think to himself, wow, they're so talented. Everything comes so easily for them. I wish I was that lucky. So let me ask you again, what sort of words would you use to describe this young boy? Type them into the chat. Me, says somebody. Okay, well, it's not you. Typical, fixed mindset, interesting. We might come back to that in a little bit. Uninspired, yeah, that's good. Complaining, immature, maybe, yeah, victim mindset, sure. Prideful, I could see that. Yeah, I mean, I came up with a few here. Let's see, a pessimistic, a defeatist, someone with no drive, maybe someone who's a perfectionist, weak-willed, lazy, easily discouraged. So this young boy and Ernest Jones are pretty different people. But let me ask you a question about these two. At what points in their stories did these differences really show up? What was it about them where the difference between these two characters was most pronounced? What do you think? Type it into chat if you have an idea. Life accomplishments, there's a tipping point perhaps. Ernest Jones sort of accepting the truth of his situation, their view of what's possible. I mean, these are all interesting, believing himself. Yeah, these are the disparity between their conditions and their outcomes. Yeah, the way that I would simplify it perhaps is that the differences between the young boy and Ernest Jones showed up when they were struggling, when things were not going well, is when you got to really see who these two characters fundamentally were, when they were facing a setback. Ernest Jones persevered even after losing a leg, one of the most devastating injuries that could happen to a professional athlete, and he went on to become successful. The young boy rarely persevered with anything. When things got tough, he would just give up and take the easy path. And the difference, I think, is down to their mindsets. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about mindsets. We're going to talk about the differences between the two mindsets. We'll be talking about the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. We'll spend a little bit of time understanding our own mindsets and how to tell where we are. And then we'll talk about how we can change our mindset if we don't like the one that we have, and not just how to change it in the moment, but how to keep it where we want it. But before we dive into mindsets, I would like for all of you to do a little bit of an exercise. And it's this. I want you to spend a few minutes thinking about one or two things that you cannot do today, especially if it's something that you've always wanted to be able to do, but you just feel like, you don't have the talent for it, or it's going to be too difficult for you. Maybe it's something you've actually tried before, but you gave up when it seemed like it just wasn't for you. Could be playing an instrument, could be learning a foreign language, whatever it might be. So either write it down onto a piece of paper for yourself or type it into the chat. I cannot, and then whatever that thing is for you. So let's see, what sort of things do people want to be able to do? Okay, I want to swim. Yeah, I cannot swim. I cannot stick to a schedule. I cannot sing. I feel you on that one. I cannot play an instrument. Sure. I cannot blame anyone if I fail. It's an interesting one. Okay. I cannot jump over Niagara Falls. Wow. Can anyone jump? Is that a thing you can do? I suppose maybe there's a part that's wide enough, narrow enough you can do that. I can't be a writer. I can't be a runner. I can't follow through. I can't speak in front of 100 people. I completely understand that. I can't fly a helicopter. Yeah, that's a good one. I want to be able to fly a helicopter. That'd be pretty cool. All right. So remember those. We're going to come back to them in a little minute, shortly, in a little while. And let's talk about, well, something that actually I cannot do. And for me, one of those things is drawing. And in case it wasn't obvious, that young boy that I talked about earlier, well, that was me. That was me as a child. I kind of gave up on things when they were tough. I always assumed that if you were supposed to be good at something, you'd just be good at it. And therefore, all I was interested in was finding the stuff that I was already supposed to be good at. And drawing and painting was definitely something I was no good at whatsoever. I sucked at it. It was terrible. I had no talent for it. And so I really didn't want to spend any time on it. And to prove it, here is a picture I drew. This is a self-portrait, if you can believe it. I drew this not when I was 5 years old, but when I was, let's say, closer to 35 years old. And, well, it's not very good, let's just say. And I might have just left it there, except that one day I was browsing through a bookshop and I came across a book. And for some reason, I picked it up off the shelf and I started reading it. And the book was called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. And it is not an exaggeration to tell you, folks, that this book changed my life. I mean, there are a few things that I can point to where there was a definite turning point in my life. But I would not be here today talking to you right now if I had not picked up that book off that shelf. Because in that book, Betty Edwards taught me to do something that I knew for a fact was impossible. She taught me to draw. This is a picture that I drew after reading her book. And yeah, a lot of work and practice. And I want to make it very clear. I did not learn any new talent. I did not discover any hidden talent for drawing. I have no more talent for drawing today than I did when I started. But what Betty Edwards did change was my mindset. And although I didn't realize it at the time, I came to realize that the mindset that had changed was this idea of mindset that came from a psychologist named Dr. Carol Dweck. Some of you may have read this book or have seen this book. And she was working out of Stanford as a researcher, and she spent her career trying to understand really how people handle failure. What do they do? What do people do when they face a challenge or a setback? And in her book, Mindset, the New Psychology of Success, she describes that we generally find ourselves in one of two mindsets, either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And it's the mindset that we have when we face a challenge or a setback that determines how we handle it. When we have a fixed mindset, we tend to believe that our basic human characteristics, things like our intelligence, our talents, even personal qualities like integrity or work ethic, are fixed. That somehow they are set in stone, either when we're born or at some early point in our lives. And thereafter, They cannot be changed at all. And Carol Dweck describes it like this. She says that a fixed mindset creates an urgency to prove ourselves over and over. Every situation calls for a confirmation of our intelligence or our personality or our character. Every situation is evaluated. Will I succeed or fail? Will I look smart or dumb? Will I be accepted or rejected? Will I feel like a winner or a loser? How many of you have ever found yourself thinking that? Type into chat if you have. I'll certainly fess up to that. I've definitely had thoughts like that in my life, for sure. Never. Okay, Ravi, I like your confidence. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have at some point in their lives, right? They start to worry about how other people perceive them, or they start to think that, you know, they're stuck and they can't grow. Well, the problem is with that fixed mindset is it actually leads to a lot of undesirable behavior and thought patterns. For example, when you have a fixed mindset, you're much more likely to avoid challenges. You're much more likely to give up easily. You'll avoid asking questions. You'll become threatened by the success of others. You will avoid or ignore criticism. You'll celebrate winning over trying, of outcome over effort. You'll be concerned primarily with how other people see you, how you're regarded. And you'll tend to have negative, backward-looking thoughts. That's a lot of negativity to be associated with that mindset. But it kind of makes sense, right? If you fundamentally believe that you as a person cannot grow or change, then you probably believe that about everybody. Nobody can grow or change. And if no one can grow, then nothing will ever get better. The world will always be the way it is, and it can never improve. And that is so depressing. What kind of thought is that going to weigh on you? It's yeah, that's a hard one to swallow. So what Carol Dweck says is that we should try to shift our ways to have a growth mindset. And when we have a growth mindset, we believe that our qualities and our abilities are not set in stone, that they can in fact grow and change, especially if we put in the effort. This is what she says. She says, the growth mindset is based on the belief that your basic qualities are things you can cultivate based on your efforts. Although people differ in every which way, everyone can grow through application and experience. The passion for stretching yourself and sticking to it, even or especially when it's not going well, is the hallmark of a growth mindset. This is the mindset that allows people to thrive during some of the most challenging times of their lives. When you have a growth mindset, you're much more likely to embrace challenges, to persevere through difficulties, to ask questions, to ask for help, to seek out criticism and feedback, to celebrate the success of other people, to celebrate trying over winning, to focus more on how we see ourselves, and to have positive, forward-looking thoughts. When we face a challenge with a growth mindset, we see it as an obstacle to be overcome, not as a roadblock, which is permanently going to get in our way. We want to keep trying. We want to see if we can overcome that and be successful. And a growth mindset fundamentally allows us to believe in ourselves and in other people around us. And so it's a much more optimistic state of mind. It's important to note that our mindsets exist on a spectrum, and they are situational. We might find ourselves with more of a fixed mindset in some areas, or in some situations, and more of a growth mindset in others. For example, you might think of yourself as having a very fixed mindset when it comes to, say, mathematics. Oh, I'm terrible at math. It's just always been a subject I've never been any good at, and that's just how it is. But yet in other things, perhaps like public speaking, you might have more of a growth mindset. After all, none of you would have joined Toastmasters if you didn't have somewhere in you a belief that you could learn to become more comfortable and more confident as a speaker, as a communicator, as a leader. And this is important to recognize that, because as you go through life, you'll find yourself probably somewhere on the spectrum. And it's really useful to be able to look at those parts of your life where you have succeeded, where you have had a growth mindset, so you can lean into it and steal from yourself and look at what you were doing when you were being successful and try to keep that in mind when you're having struggles, when you're struggling. All right, so hopefully at this point, I have convinced you that a growth mindset is something that you should have or that you should want to have. If you need more convincing, please do go read Carol Dweck's book. It's really eye-opening. It's a fascinating read. And you may be wondering, okay, well, if I want to have a growth mindset, but how do I get there? What do I need to do? Well, the first thing you need to do is to look at where you are today. You have to think about what your current mindset is in the circumstances you might find yourself in. And one way we can do that is to pay attention to our language, to the inner monologue that runs through our head. Pay attention to the words that we use to describe ourselves or the situation we're in. That's why I started talking about the two young men, myself and Ernest Jones, and thinking about the words we would use to describe them, because I think that's a very powerful thing to think about. So let's have a look at some examples. I'm going to put some phrases on the screen, and I want you to type into the chat whether you think they are something that's a person with a fixed mindset would say, or whether it's something you think a person with a growth mindset would say. So type either fixed or growth for each of these. All right, let's see. You can't change who you are. Is that a fixed mindset or a growth mindset thing to say? Fixed, 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 fixed. Yeah, pretty much that's clearly a fixed. Life is so unfair. Fixed mindset or growth mindset? F for fixed, absolutely, it's definitely fixed. How about this one? How can I improve? Fixed or growth? Growth, G's for growth. Yeah, absolutely. You want to improve? That's very much growth mindset. Can you help me? Fixed or growth? Yep, I think that's growth too, absolutely. This always happens to me. Fixed or growth? Yep, fixed. This is going to be a great challenge. Fixed, growth, growth. Yeah, definitely growth. I'll never figure this out. Fixed, growth, fixed. Fixed. This is hard, but it's not impossible. Fixed, growth, fixed, growth. Yeah, that's a growth thing. You're acknowledging that it may be difficult, but you're not willing to give up on it. I'm a failure. Failure begins with F. It's fixed. I'll keep trying until I get it right. Growth. Yeah, pretty clearly growth. So let me ask you, how many of you have said something like the words or the phrases on the left? Yeah, I have for sure. What about the ones on the right? Yeah, I have. Yeah, so like you'll probably see in yourself that you can imagine yourself saying either of these things. My point again is this, that it's the words that we use that is often the first indicator of where our head is at, what our mindset is at that moment. So look out for the phrases that indicate that you might have a fixed mindset, or look out for the phrases that indicate you might have a growth mindset. And we'll come back to this idea in a little bit. All right. I want to pause and see if we have any questions so far about the general concept of mindsets and of the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. Ashish, do we have any questions?
No, Stewart, I don't see any questions in the chat window.
All right, okay. Well, no worries. If anybody has
one by Abhijit, and now he says, how can I change my mindset?
How can you, well, that's excellent. We are going to go on to that right now. Thank you for moving this along. Very good. All right. Okay, so how do you change your mindset? That's a great question. Well, what if you find yourself using these sort of fixed mindset words and phrases? Well, how about this? If it's your words that are an indicator of your mindset, what if we could use words to change our mindset? Could it be really that simple? If our fixed mindset is saying that something is impossible, then maybe there's a way we can tell ourselves that, well, perhaps it's possible after all. We need to find a way to open that door to possibility. And there's one word, it's a very short, very simple word, which can do exactly that. And that word is yet. Yet. I can't draw yet. I can't sing yet. I didn't get that job yet. I don't have my DTM yet. I didn't get that promotion yet. I don't know how to swim yet. I can't fly a helicopter yet. Try it yourself right now. Go back to the thing earlier on, you said that you could not do something only to type it into the chat with the word yet on the end. I cannot do something yet. Type it in now. Let's see. I want to see them all.
Stewart, while people are doing that, there is one interesting question. And the question is there any data that shows a limit to move from fixed to growth mindset? And if so, what data is that?
If I understand the question correctly, and if I don't, then please clarify in chat. If the question is more about how much of a growth mindset you can develop, as far as I know, there's no data that suggests there's an upper limit. I think there has been a lot of research into the notion of a learning curve and what that means for your growth. In other words, there'll be some things that you'll grow faster at than others. And yeah, I mean, we have to acknowledge that there are some things where there are physical constraints. You know, if you want to be, you know, a 100-meter champion, if you want to be the next Usain Bolt, well, you need certain physiological characteristics to make that happen. But the important point that the authors make, including Carol Dweck, is that just because you might not become the next Usain Bolt doesn't mean that there's not value in trying to get to that point, and that growth is still an important thing. All right, let's see, what did we get in the chat? I can't retire yet. Yeah, you and me both, I feel you. I cannot stick to a schedule yet. Very good. I cannot speak on stage with a larger audience yet. Excellent, I love it. I cannot swim yet. No, not yet, but maybe one day. I cannot stop myself from thinking about that I am being judged yet. Okay. Do you see how powerful it is? It's just one word, and you just add it on to the end of a sentence. But do you feel like it's taking you from a place where something seems impossible and it's giving you permission to believe that maybe it could happen? Do you agree that it opens the door to a future where you believe you could achieve something that you always thought was beyond you? I certainly feel that it does. And I think it's pretty amazing that if we change our words, we can start to change our mindsets. We watch what we say, it can change how we think. Now, it's not as simple as that. Of course, this is just the beginning. Adding yet to the end of a sentence isn't going to tell you how to get there. It isn't going to do the hard work of helping you achieve the thing that you want to happen. You have to go through the door and you have to keep walking. And to do that, you need something else that's really important. And someone else mentioned it earlier, and it is this idea of grit. Grit. What is grit? Well, grit comes from another psychologist, Dr. Angela Duckworth. And much like Carol Dweck, Angela Duckworth has spent her life trying to understand what makes some people more successful than others. And in particular, is there any way we can predict who is going to be successful and who is not? And in all of her research, there was one personal characteristic that came up time and time again, one thing that seemed to predict outcome of success much more than anything else. And it's this personal characteristic called grit. And she describes grit as our passion and perseverance for long-term goals. And I think this is a very powerful thing. And in her book, she goes into a lot of detail about what this really means. And we're going to talk just a little bit about it today. But she says that grittiness is really a very sort of mechanical thing. You know, to be gritty is to put one foot in front of the other. To be gritty is to hold fast to an interesting and purposeful goal. To be gritty is to invest day after week after year in challenging practice. To be gritty is to fall down 7 times and to rise 8. And that you can grow your grit. See, being gritty is not glamorous or magic. There's no trick to it. It's really the choice that you make to keep making progress every single day, one day at a time, even when things are challenging and tough. And what I love about it is that she's reinforcing exactly what Dr. Dweck said about all of our personality traits. Some people have more grit than others. Everyone has a different level of grittiness, but everyone can develop more of it. In other words, you can say, I don't have grit yet. See, isn't it brilliant? I told you, yet it's such a good word for this. And the thing is, grit and growth go really well together. They kind of support and reinforce each other. Why is that? Well, I think it's because they both show up at the same time. Your growth mindset and your grit show up when you're facing a challenge or a struggle of some kind. It's your mindset that dictates your outlook. It's your mindset that's going to tell you whether or not you think it's worth pursuing or worth proceeding. When you have a fixed mindset, remember, failure discourages you from trying again. But with a growth mindset, failure is a chance to learn and then to give it another go. And it's grit that will help you then take that next step, the grittiness to continue on even when it's difficult. Grit will help you overcome that challenge. And then when you overcome that challenge, it reinforces your growth mindset. It's like you say to yourself, yeah, you see, I had a growth mindset, I had a challenge, I overcame it, growth mindset was right. And then the next time you have a challenge, you have this reinforced growth mindset that says, yes, keep going. And you have the grit, which then keeps you going. And it creates this virtuous cycle that reinforces itself. So grit and a growth mindset will help you overcome the challenges that are on your path. But they need to be used, as Angela Duckworth said, purposefully. They need to be properly channeled and directed to work. And to do that, you need to have goals. Not just any goals, you need to have purposeful goals. So the question is...
Stewart, I have a question. A couple of questions from the audience. And
okay.
So the first one is, when you did mention that in a growth mindset, we are happy about others' success. So the question is, how does this relate to our growth? And the second question is, does age play any limit to move from a fix it to a growth mindset?
Okay, well, let me start with the second question. Does age play any limit? Does age play into a limit on moved from a fixed to a growth mindset? Not as far as I know. And in fact, Angela Duckworth, who wrote Grit, has done a little bit of research into grittiness over time. And she finds that the older you get, the more grittier you tend to become, which I think is interesting. And she explains a few theories as to why that might be. But no, as far as I know, there's no reason why you can't, at any age, choose to have a different mindset, choose to have a different approach on life. And the first question, remind me what the first question was again?
So you did mention that with a growth mindset, we are happy about others' success. So the question is, how does that relate to our growth? Being happy about someone else's success, how does that relate to our growth?
Okay, well, yeah, so the question is, when you see someone else succeeding, what does that have to do with your growth mindset? Well, I think it's more of an indication that you have a growth mindset. You know, as I said in sort of my example, when I was a kid and I'd see my friends doing well at things and I'd get jealous about it. I'd feel like, you know, why am I not succeeding in that thing? And that's a fixed mindset way of thinking that, you know, that I can never achieve that thing because I'm fixed. I can't change, I can't grow. And the things that my friends are doing, I want to be able to do those, but I know that I never will be able to. That's sort of a fixed mindset thought. When you have a growth mindset, you don't think that way anymore. And when you see other people succeeding, I mean, all right, maybe you're not necessarily happy for them, but you certainly should not feel jealous or bad about other people's success when you have a growth mindset, because you're much more focused on how you're going to achieve your own goals. And to the extent that you see other people succeeding, that maybe is a source of inspiration for you rather than something that generates a sense of jealousy. That's how I think about it anyway. But that's a really good question. You know, I think there's a lot of interesting, it's interesting to think about the balance between finding our own internal driver and, you know, relying on other people to help us achieve what we want to achieve. And that's something that I'm not really going to talk a lot about in this workshop, but it is something I've thought about. This workshop is really about what goes on up in here in your own mind. I don't talk in this workshop particularly about collaboration and the importance of that, but that's certainly a very important topic. And in fact, if anyone wants to do a workshop on collaboration, then please let me know, because I'd love to attend it. Okay, do we have any other questions before I move into a little section about goals?
That's now, Stewart.
All right, thank you. Those are great. All right, so yes, goals, and in particular, purposeful goals. Well, I don't want to go too deep into goals. There are plenty of resources out there about setting goals and things like that. Many of you probably are familiar with goals. In particular, you're probably familiar with the concept of a SMART goal. And the most important thing about the goals we're going to be thinking of today are that, yes, they should be specific. You should have a specific idea of something you want to achieve. It should be measurable in the sense that you should know for precisely whether or not you have succeeded or not in achieving that goal. And they should be time bound, just because it's good to have a time limit on when you want to achieve something. It can act as a motivator to get something done. And so a goal for me, when I talk about drawing, might look something like this. By Thanksgiving, I want to draw a recognizable portrait. So this seems pretty good. It's specific, like drawing a portrait. That's a specific outcome. It's measurable, right? I can show my portrait to somebody else. If they recognize who it is, I can say that I have drawn a recognizable portrait. And it's time bound, right? So by Thanksgiving, that gives me what, about 3 months or so, which seems reasonable, I suppose, to draw a portrait. It's a good goal. It's not yet a purposeful goal, but it is a good goal to start with. So over to you. For the thing that it is that you want to achieve, I want you to try writing a goal that will help you get there. And don't worry too much about like whether you think it's realistic to achieve it in a certain time. The important point is that you're thinking about something specific that you want to achieve, that it's measurable, that you can say yes or no, I have or have not achieved it, and that you've given yourself some kind of time limit for it. So type that into chat right now. Let's see what kinds of goals people might set for themselves. Okay, so I see that someone's written that they want to write a book. That's good. I mean, you can definitely tell when you've written a book. Would you put a time limit on it? Like, when do you think you would want to have a book written by? March 2021. Perfect. There you go. Maybe you'll do it, maybe you won't. That's not the point today. The point is just to be thinking about goals in this way. Become a CPA by next year. I love it. By the end of the year, I want to finish my pathway, level 2. Great. Yes, I have 2 paths that I need to finish. I have level 5 to do in both of them. And I want to do that by June of next year so I can get my second DTM. By the end of the year, I want to get rejected 100 times. That sounds intriguing. I want to know more about that. By the end of November 2020, I want to be able to swim continuously for 200 yards. Yeah, that's a great goal. Okay. So, okay, so you've done this. And now what we need to do is think about them in terms of being purposeful goals. This is what Angela Duckworth was talking about, this idea of a purposeful goal. And so I want you to add something to the end. I want you to add a why. Why is it that you want to achieve that goal? And the reason that this is important is because the why is where you'll find your motivation. That's going to be the source of your motivation to keep going when things get tough. It's the reason why that turns an ordinary goal into a purposeful goal. Viktor Frankl said that those who have a why can bear almost any how. And so for me, learning to draw, I mean, that was a nice goal to have, like being able to draw and say I could do something that I thought was impossible. In and of itself, doesn't really mean a lot. The reason actually that I wanted to learn to draw was because I wanted to become a designer. Imagine being a designer who couldn't draw. Sounds kind of silly, right? So I made it a goal to myself to become a designer. And so now I have a purposeful goal. There's a reason why I'm trying to achieve the thing that I want to achieve. So I want you to do the same. For the goals that you just came up with, whether you wrote them down for yourself or typed them into chat, add a why to the end. Why is it that it's important to you to achieve that thing. By the end of September, I want to have created 3 a cappella covers because I want to get better at figuring out harmonies for my own music. Great, that's purposeful. I want to be able to swim fast by 2021 because as I get older, swimming will be the best exercise. Yeah, being healthy in your old age, that sounds like a really purposeful goal. Do I have any others? As I shared, I have 2 paths that I need to complete. I need to do level 5. And if I do that, then I'll get my second DTM, and that will join the first DTM I got under the legacy pathway, and then I'll add to it my first DTM under the legacy program, and my second DTM would be under pathway. So now I would have a DTM from each. By the end of 2020, I want to be able to swim continuously 200 yards to complete a triathlon. So these are purposeful goals. Is that making sense? Do we have any questions about the purposeful goal?
No questions so far.
All right.
So one of the questions I do see is, if you
Right.
do not achieve your goal, what happens then? What next?
We'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll talk about what to do when things aren't working out in a little bit. But we have a purposeful goal. It has a reason why, but it's not done. We're not done yet. I want you to dig actually a little bit deeper. I want you to add another why to the end. Why is it that, well, first, why is so important? For me, becoming a designer was something I wanted to do because I saw my mum struggle so much with technology, whether it was microwave or the TV or a new computer or the car radio. She just found technology frustrating and hard to use. And as I looked around, I saw lots of other people facing that same struggle. And I love technology, and I'm a software, or I was at least a software engineer, and I was frustrated with the fact that I was making great new technology that was hard to use. It just made no sense to me. And so the reason I wanted to become a designer was because I wanted to make technology more accessible to everybody, for people like my mom, for people who struggle with it so much. And if I kept digging, I would say, well, why is that important to me? Well, because I want there to be less pain and frustration and struggle in the world. And so now I have a pretty big why at the end of this. That's a pretty big motivator for me to reduce the amount of struggle and pain in the world. I mean, that seems like a good thing to aim for in life. In fact, you could call that my life's purpose. And what I like about this is that I can draw a straight line. I can connect the dots from doing something seemingly trivial and insignificant, like learning to draw, to something that's really important and really powerful. And that's what purposeful goals are all about. And in fact, Angela Duckworth says you can think about goals almost like as if they're part of a hierarchy, with smaller goals leading to bigger ones, which lead to even bigger ones. And that big goal at the top, that's your life purpose. That is the thing that's going to drive you forward. It's your reason to exist. My entire career as a designer is built around that big goal of trying to take pain and suffering out of the world if I can. And so as you go further up to these bigger goals, you're digging deeper into your why. You're really getting to understand what your purpose is. And the reason that all of this is important is because the bigger the why, the grander your life purpose is, the more motivated you are to succeed, the more effort you're likely to put in, the less discouraged you'll be when things don't work out because you have this big thing that you're trying to achieve. And that's grit. That's what gives you the grit, is having this big thing that you can't ignore. There is a book by Brian Tracy called Goals, ! And he describes goals as kind of being like magnets. In fact, he thinks that we as human beings are goal achieving machines. We can't help ourselves but to try and achieve goals, but they have to be big enough that we are attracted towards them sort of inevitably. And so I like this idea of having a big life purpose goal that everything is focused towards. And one of the reasons is, if you take a look at this goal hierarchy for me right now, you'll see something, right? And you'll see that there are spots, there are holes where some goals could plug into it. And you can work from the top down. You can start with that big life purpose and fill in goals that will help you get there. And so you could have these very diverse low-level goals, but they all lead up to something bigger, to something bigger, to something bigger. And it's this idea of the goal hierarchy that helps you figure out how all of these different pieces of your life, all the things that you're trying to do, all fit together, what they all in sum mean for you. And I think that's really powerful, to have some idea of how everything in your life is pointing you towards your life's purpose. And it has another benefit too, because maybe you'll come up with something you want to do and you're trying to figure out, like, well, how does it fit into my goals? How does it lead me to my life purpose? And if you find something where you can't really make that connection, that's a good point to pause and think about whether that specific goal is really something you want to invest time and energy into. At the end of the day, there's only so much time we have to do all the stuff we want to do. And so deciding what not to do is just as important as deciding what we are going to do. And so when you think about goals in this way, and you think about how they all fit together, it makes it a little bit easier to make decisions about where you spend your time and your energy and your money. So these goals, they give you clarity and they give you purpose, and you're much more likely to stay motivated when you have a big thing that you're aiming towards. And it also helps with your growth mindset. If you're always thinking about that big goal, about making technology accessible to everyone, or making the world a less painful, frustrating place to be, you're already looking forwards. You're already thinking about how you can get there. You're pointing yourself towards achieving something big. And that is a hallmark of a growth mindset. Okay. We kind of went on a little bit of a diversion, it seems like, but I think this idea of goals, of hierarchical goals, of a big life purpose that everything feeds into, is actually really important for maintaining a growth mindset and for developing that grit. So I'm going to pause to see if there are any questions. We have one little piece to cover before we finish out here. So Ashish, are there any questions that have come up?
Yes, there are two interesting questions, Stephen.
Okay.
So the first one is, if you have a reason being to satisfy your ego, is it a good enough reason to pursue a goal? Would that be effective? I'll let you answer that before I give you the next one.
Okay. That's a very good question. Is it enough to do something because it satisfies your ego? Maybe it is. And the reason I say that is because I forget who it was that first proposed this notion. If you happen to know, type it into the chat, because it'd be useful for me to remember. But I think about altruism, and somebody said there's no such thing as altruism, right? There's no such thing as being selfless, because even when you're doing something ostensibly for the benefit of others, the reason that you're doing that thing is because it satisfies you fundamentally. You feel good when you help other people. And so altruism doesn't really exist. Everything that we do is driven by our own desires or our own motivations. And so if your ego is part of that equation, then yeah, I mean, I think it's okay to have a life purpose that fulfills your ego, because at the end of the day, it's part of what satisfies you as a human being. So that's what I think about, at least when I think about, am I doing this for myself or am I doing it for other people? The answer is both, and I don't think it's possible to separate those two things out. I hope that answers the question.
Are you referring to a book called I think it's Richard Dawkins' Selfish Gene? Does that ring a bell? I mean, to the point you're making about there's no such thing as altruism, I get a vague sense it might be this gentleman called Richard Dawkins.
It may be. I haven't read that book, but if you wouldn't mind typing it into the chat, I'd like to add that to my reading list. Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure.
And Ashish, you said there was another question.
Yeah, there's another interesting question. So the question goes like this. So if you have a goal, say to learn a violin or an instrument, and you want to eventually end up with those as your hobbies, so is it wrong to have them, or is it okay?
No, it's. I mean, okay. Let me be clear. I don't want to say that there are things that you shouldn't do just because you enjoy them. The reason I present things in this way, this idea of goal hierarchies, is because it can just help us figure out where things fit in our lives. And if there is a goal which is entirely just for yourself, like let's say that you wanted to learn an instrument just because it would give you personal pleasure to do so, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I wonder what else it's leading to. I wonder what other calling that is attached to. I mean, I also play musical instruments. I've sang for many years. I played piano and some other things. And I don't know that I've really successfully answered for myself how any of that fits in, except that, yeah, I suppose it does give me a sense of pleasure knowing that I can master a piece of music, or I can play, I can translate the notes, and I can experience the emotions that go along with that. But I will also say that I am not a professional musician, and that when I look at the goals that I've set for myself, music doesn't really fit into that. And in fact, I gave up some of my musical activities so that I could do Toastmasters. And I did Toastmasters because I wanted to be a more confident speaker, so that I could present my ideas more clearly, so that people could understand me, so that the world was a little bit less of a painful place for the people I had to interact with on a daily basis. And so, you know, in that case for me, there was a choice of taking out something I enjoyed and replacing it with something that had a purpose. But I can't say for you that that's what you should do. I just think it's something that will help you stay motivated when things get tough. Any other questions?
That's it for now, Stewart. Thank you.
All right. So as I said, we are close. We just have a little more work to do, going back to our goals with our reasons that get progressively bigger. We also have to think about how we're going to achieve these goals. We have to talk, as Angela Duckworth says, about these little steps that we're going to take. And so that's the last thing I'm going to ask you to do, is to think about some steps that you could take, some little steps that you could take starting tomorrow. Something that you could start to do tomorrow to get to that first goal for you. So for me, for example, I started by reading that book. And then in that book, there are a bunch of exercises. And, you know, I first practiced drawing a finger, and then I practiced drawing a hand, and then I practiced drawing a face. And then I was able to draw a portrait. And I did that a few times and was able to get better as I went along. So those are steps that you can take one step at a time to get to that goal. And you could even break it down further, of course. You could think about, you know, I could read 10 pages every day. I could draw for an hour a day, or even half an hour, or even 10 minutes every day. This idea of I forget who it was, maybe it was Alan Alda, who was starred in MASH and was a director for MASH. It might have been him. Had this idea of a chain of goals where you get a calendar, and every day that you do something towards a goal, you check it off. And you want to make a check mark every day, a check mark. Doesn't matter if you spend 5 minutes on it or 2 hours on it. And you build up this chain of continual effort till it becomes sort of an automatic thing that you keep doing. The point is that there's something you can do every day to make progress towards your goals. And that's an important aspect of that persistence, of that grittiness, of that persevering, even when you don't really want to. So for your goals, I'd like you to come up with 3 or 4 or 5 steps that you can take tomorrow to start making progress to your goals. And I want you to type them into chats. Let's see what sorts of things you came up with. If you're listening, if you are wanting to swim, what is something that you could do tomorrow? If you want to swim 200 yards by next year, what is something you could do tomorrow that will help you get to that goal? If you want to write a book by next year, what is something that you could do tomorrow to make progress towards that goal? If you want to get your DTM, what is something that you could do tomorrow to make progress towards that goal? Yeah, you go to the pool, spend 30 minutes in the water. I have a fellow Toastmaster, a colleague of mine, who swims out in the ocean every day. He goes down to Aquatic Park here in San Francisco, and he does things that I think are insane, but he does it every day, and I greatly admire him for his tenacity in doing that. Yeah, if you're working on a speech, maybe you don't have a speech on the schedule yet. Maybe you haven't been put in by your VPE. Doesn't mean you can't work on your speech. You can start working on that tomorrow for sure. Yeah, as Rita says, you can dedicate a small amount of time every day towards achieving your goals. And then it just becomes an automatic thing that you will start to do. Okay, I want to make sure that we finished up by the top of the hour. So let's just talk a little bit about how you'll deal with things when you start to struggle. I mean, basically, as you're going along, you're taking these steps every day. One of two things is going to happen. You're either going to struggle or you're going to find yourself succeeding. Well, when you find yourself struggling, the first thing I would say is check for that fixed mindset. And how do you do that? Well, you watch your words. Pay attention to your inner monologue. Listen to the words that you're using to describe yourself or the situation you're in. Perhaps add the yet at the end if you find yourself saying, I can't do this. Just say, I can't do this yet. Celebrate your effort. This is a big thing from Carol Dweck's work, is that too much attention is focused on praising the outcome and not enough attention is paid to praising the effort that goes into it. So celebrate your effort, acknowledge the fact that you've worked at it, and then make a promise to yourself to persevere. One of my favorite quotes is Mary Ann Radmacher, and she says that courage is not always a roar. Sometimes it is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. And that's grit. That's perseverance. It's when you just say to yourself, it didn't work out today, but I'm going to try again tomorrow. And you make that promise to yourself. But if things are going well, you still have to think about it, I would say. Acknowledge your growth mindset. Acknowledge the fact that you had a growth mindset that allowed you to succeed. Still pay attention to your words. Pay attention to the words you use to describe yourself or your situation when things are going well. Remember those words. They might come in handy one day. Celebrate your effort, whether things are going well or not. Celebrate the effort that you're putting into it and promise to persevere. Don't slack off now just because things are going well. Make the promise that you'll try again tomorrow. And you'll notice that these two lists are pretty similar, right? They're not very different from each other, and that is intentional. Having the same attitude, the same energy, the same emotional consistency, I think is really important. I've heard this said a lot about sports in particular, that coaches who are emotionally consistent, whether things are going well or not, tend to have better results than those coaches that you see that throw tantrums and get really upset when things are going badly and then are running all over the place celebrating when things are going well. I think maybe there's something to that. I haven't read much about it. If you have, or if you know something about this, please type into the chat. But the way I think of it for myself is that if you're kind of here and here when things are going badly, if this is sort of your emotional range, when things are going well or things are going badly, that's a much easier shift to make. If things are going badly and you want to get to the emotional state where things are going well, that's a small shift. But whereas if you're kind of out here and you're doing this, it seems like it's a lot of energy to go from feeling really upset to feeling really ecstatic and back again. And so to me, it makes sense to just try and keep these things in balance. Don't get too upset when things are going badly. Don't get too excited when things are going well. Yes, celebrate success. Yes, feel despondent if things aren't working out. But ultimately, it's about consistency every day that will help you achieve your goals. All right, so let's summarize. The growth mindset, or the fixed mindset, is one in which you believe that your traits are fundamentally fixed. Your intelligence, your skills, your talents, they're fixed and can never be changed. But with a growth mindset, you believe that your traits can grow over time, especially if you put in effort. I suggest listening to the words you use, especially when you're struggling, to find out what mindset you have, and perhaps using yet to help shift you from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, to open the door of possibility. Grit will help you through the struggles, that help you overcome those obstacles. And as you apply grit, your growth mindset will reinforce, and vice versa. I want you to think about setting goals, not just individual goals that take you one step further to something, but have a life purpose. Really think about what it is that you're trying to achieve in general and see how all the pieces fit together. Take steps every day towards your goals. Set that habit, that expectation of yourself that you're going to persevere regardless of how things are going. And whether you succeed or not, celebrate your efforts. And whether you succeed or not, promise that you will persevere. All right, 7 o'clock and 43 seconds. Pretty good timing, I think. I did okay on that. But we have plenty of time for questions. So if there are more questions to ask, please let me know. Ashish, do we have more questions in the chat?
Not in the chat right now. So if anyone wants to ask questions, you can unmute yourself and ask Stewart directly. If you're uncomfortable, please put it in the chat and I'll relay it to Stewart. Thanks.
Okay. And yes, there is a feedback form. I am trying to grow in the spirit of a growth mindset. I am asking for your feedback on this session today. I'd love to know more about what worked for you, what stuff you'd like to see covered, maybe the parts of the session that weren't so helpful for you. Please do let me know, because that helps me grow as a speaker. Oh, Charles wants to go back to the summary slide. I think all of these slides will be sent out. Is that right, Abi? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yep, so you will get a copy of these slides. So don't worry if you didn't write everything down just now, but I put the summary slide up there for you as well.
I have a question. Do you think about your fixed mindset maybe being buried in your subconscious? And so while you might say you want to have a growth mindset, that your subconscious stays in the fixed area?
Maybe. I'm no psychologist. I wish that I was. That would be pretty cool. I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's possible that I'd have to go back and read what Carol Dweck says about it. I suspect she might say that if you've had a fixed mindset for a long time, it can become pretty embedded in who you are as a person. It's like, you know, when I was talking about goals, and there's this idea like if you have a life purpose, then sort of you find that everything then orients itself towards that life purpose. I think this is something that Brian Tracy talks about in his book as well, the book about goals. That, you know, when you have a big audacious goal, you can't help but that will always influence your decisions. Like every decision you make, whether you want it to or not, will start to be influenced by the big goal you're trying to achieve. And I can say that probably true for myself. When I made that decision that I wanted to be a designer, all of a sudden I found that all of the decisions that I was making from then on started to point towards that. And I just had it in my mind, you know, is this going to help me become a designer or not? Is this going to help me get closer to that goal or not? And so I don't know if that fixed mindset will ever disappear. I think it's always just going to be part of who I am, at least. So maybe it is just deeply rooted in my subconscious, but I don't think it's the only thing that's rooted in there. I think there is an optimism in there. I think there is a belief that is embedded in there. And maybe the way to approach it is to think about, you know, the choices that you have when you're consciously aware of them. I would also probably want to go back and read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which talks a lot about how so much of what we do is driven by our what he calls the system one brain. It's a part of the brain that we're not aware of. I don't think subconscious is the term he would use, but that's sort of how I think about it. And so much of what we do is based on habit, frankly, that our brains are trying to be super efficient and trying to make it as easy for us to live our lives as possible. And so it makes all kinds of decisions that we're not even really aware of. And I wonder to what extent our fixed and growth mindsets are controlled by that subconscious, like you say. I think it's a really interesting question. Do you have any other questions?
Stewart, I've got a quick question for you. Having not read through either of the books that you mentioned today, Mindset or Grit, I'm curious as to whether or not either of those doctors, I'll say, give an allowance for quote unquote checking in on one's goals, pivoting, potentially reprioritizing, as opposed to quitting altogether.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that the growth mindset sort of encourages.
I think the growth mindset would. It's been quite a while since I've read Mindset, so I'm not sure exactly what that would say about it. But certainly Angela Duckworth does talk about that and talks about the goals. When she describes the goal hierarchy, she says that the bigger the goal, the less inclined you are to give up on it. Conversely, the sort of lower down the goal, the smaller the goal, the easier it is to give up on it. And she says that, or the way that I read it is that there's something of a balance there, in the sense that, you know, if I want to become a designer, if that's a big goal for me, then learning to draw is one of the goals that I can use to help me get there. But it's not the only one. And so if it turns out that learning to draw really isn't something that I want to invest in, if I try it and I discover that it's not, it's too difficult, or it's too time consuming, or I'm wondering if there is another thing that I can do that will help me get towards my goal more quickly, then it's okay to switch. It's okay to give up on one thing and to replace it with a different goal. But you can only really do that if you have a bigger thing that you're aiming towards. The danger she points out is when you have a bunch of goals that aren't really connected to anything, and then you're maybe finding yourself just going from one thing to another, not really sticking with anything because you don't have a purpose. You don't have a thing that you're trying to aim towards. And so no goal seems more important than any other. And so you have no way of knowing whether you're spending the time on the things that you really want to be spending your time on. Does that kind of answer the question?
I would say it does, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's, you know, it's tough, right? I mean, like Angela Duckworth herself acknowledges in the book places that, yes, you should try to persevere. You should always try to persevere, but you have to know when to give up. And, you know, that's a tricky one, right? There's no simple answer for when you know whether to give up or whether to persevere. But yeah, having those bigger goals, I think, at least makes that decision a little bit easier. Any other questions? Ashish, I don't know if there are any other questions in the chat. I haven't really been following it for the past couple
No,
minutes.
that's pretty much
Okay.
it. No questions in the chat.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. You know, I just want to finish by saying that my own personal transformation shifted when I started thinking about when I realized the power of mindset. And I now firmly believed, and I've convinced myself several occasions, that if I put in the time and effort and I have goals that are purposeful, that I can achieve things that I always thought were impossible. And so I hope and I wish that you feel the same too. I hope that you all will think about the purposeful goals that you have for yourself, and will think about how you can achieve them. And we'll be thinking about the words you use so that you can tell if you have the right sort of mindset. Thank you all for your time and attention. Thank you for being interactive in the chat. It was a bit of an experiment. I think it worked out okay, but I'm glad that you were able to at least interact a little bit that way, even though we can't be together in person. Thanks to Abi and to Ashish for moderating and setting up this session for me and being such wonderful hosts. There's my email address. I'm happy for you to send me any thoughts that you have, any questions that you have, any things that you think I should go read. I have a huge reading list. I don't know if I'll ever read all of it, but I'm happy to add things to it for sure. And like I said, please do complete that evaluation form for me so that I can continue my own journey of growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stewart. I really enjoyed your session. The main thing which is happening in my brain is, what is my bigger purpose in life? I'm trying to form those smaller goals and bigger goals. So thank you for making that happen. Thank you everyone for joining us. This was our last TLI session. Our next district event is on October 31st. It is going to be our fall fusion. We are going to have a humorous speech contest as well as an evaluation contest. So stay tuned for timings and more details. Thank you. It was a pleasure to have you on.